Hello and welcome to the Grant Street Experience. I'm your host, Grant Ervin, Chief Resilience Officer for the City of Pittsburgh. The Grant Street Experience is our podcast about all the fun and interesting things and people that are happening along Grant Street. And today we have our terrific co-host, Rebecca Kiernan. Rebecca, how are you today?
Morning.
And then our special guest, Melanie Ondek, grant writer to the stars. Melanie, it's terrific to have you with us today. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you very much for having me.
Terrific. So your first time here on the Grant Street Experience. Rebecca and I are excited to have you here.
This is my first ever podcast. You get
first ever podcast.
Career. Yes.
Oh, so you're a newbie.
I'm a total noob.
Well, please do share the edited and unedited version with all your friends and family. Looking for a listener or two out there. So, it's going to be great. We'll take it easy on you. We promise.
All right, I appreciate it.
So maybe get started. If you could share with listeners a little bit about yourself and kind of the work that you do with the city. And how you came to work at the City of Pittsburgh. Folks are always kind of interested in that. Just maybe tell us a little bit about Melanie Ondek there.
Yeah. So I think my interest in politics probably started from a really young age. I had a grandmother who owned a flower shop and greenhouse business. So she worked, 24/7, but anytime she wasn't working, she was inside either working on her paperwork or whatever with C-SPAN on in the background. So I came from a very politically engaged family early on. So I think that was sort of the precedent that was set. It was always like, we go vote together, we talk about politics, like it's a thing that's important in our family. So I don't think I realized how important that would be to me until I started going to school. So I got my undergrad at St. Vincent College in sociology. I've always been fascinated by people and how structures and other things sort of interplay with one another. And then after that, I got my graduate degree in public policy from Duquesne University. So from there, it was sort of okay, well, now I've got a policy degree and I definitely don't want to run for office. So now what do I do?
If I could just hold you for a quick second, I just want to make note, a quick shout out to Go Bearcats for all those St. Vincent's College.
There's a lot of us around Pittsburgh.
There is. I am not a Bearcat, but I have many friends that are St. Vincent's College alumni. So I grew up in the backyard of Latrobe. So I spent a lot of time out there myself. And then also I want to note that our demographic, or our listeners, closely mirror the C-SPAN listeners. So you're
perfect. I've got the right audience. Wait, so if you're Latrobe, do you know Joey O's Pizza?
I do.
Are you a fan or not? I feel like people either love it or they hate it.
I think it's good. It's an acquired taste, but yeah, it's good.
For those of you who don't know, it's a very particular type of pizza that uses almost like a sweet pie crust, where you're like, is this pizza? But it's really good.
It is good. It takes maybe 2 or 3 visits, I think.
Yeah.
It's an acquired taste. Yeah, because you're shocked at first, right? You're like, whoa, what did I just? This is not quite pizza. But
what kind of toppings do you put on something like that?
It's like regular pizza toppings, anything you want. Yeah, Rebecca's I don't know about that. Anyways,
so I cut you off. So sorry. Go ahead. So politics.
No, that's okay.
C-SPAN,
I studied public policy at Duquesne and was like, all right, well, I don't want to run for office and I'm not super politically involved anywhere. So what is my next step? And I honestly just kind of stumbled upon an internship opportunity it was actually the Ravenstall administration. It was an unpaid internship and I had just graduated and I was like, this is it. I'm going to try it out and see what happens. So I got my foot in the door there and I worked unpaid as an intern for about 6 months. And then I worked on various projects sort of throughout the mayor's office. And it's funny because the office that I started in as an intern, where I had my own little weird desk off to the side, is actually the office that I'm currently in right now, which is very weird. And I've had many offices in between. So I think I've come full circle. Yeah. So I kind of just kept coming back to work until I was like, nobody's telling me not to come back to work. So they eventually put me on part-time, and I worked under the Ravensdale administration in the Serve Pittsburgh office, which is a Bloomberg philanthropy funded sort of arm of the mayor's office that was really focused on volunteerism, which was really a cool experience. So I got grants sort of in city government really early on from the perspective of applying for and managing grants. And then after that, in the Peduto administration, they created the grants office. They created sort of a centralized grants office. Before that, it was all sort of disparate all over the place. People kind of applied for what they wanted to, when they wanted to, without really talking to the administration about priorities and like making sure that we were integrated with the budget process. So Mayor Peduto came on and said, I think we need this. So we've set out over the last, 6 years to establish our office which seems like a very long time. I've been with the city almost 8 years now. I think September was 8 years.
Congratulations.
Thank you. So now my role there is really that touch point for all city departments who want to apply for grant funding, whether that's local foundation funding, state funding, which is really our sweet spot as a local municipality, and then federal funding. We get all of it. So the coolest part of my job, and maybe this is a question you have later, is that I get to work with every single city department, every single director, everybody in between. So I get to see a lot of different folks and get to know a lot of different folks and different projects. So all the time. And you guys know I get to learn about sustainability all the time when I work with you.
We're your favorite, right?
Oh, definitely. No, I mean that. I think some of the coolest projects we worked on are with your office. So
maybe start there a little bit, Melanie. I mean, that is kind of the fun thing about grants, is the ability to explore new ideas and to be creative. I mean, maybe talk a little bit about that in terms of just what the ability to be innovative and creative in kind of the ideation process and what you see across departments.
Yeah, I wish that there were more of us, because I wish we could all take deeper dives into all of the work that we do. So there are 3 of us total in the office. 2 of us who work primarily on the pre-award side of things or the application side of things, and then 1 person who works on the post-award side of things or the management side of things. So we've got 2 people sort of trying to facilitate all of these different relationships and simultaneous deadlines all the time. So sometimes I get to take slightly deeper dives if my schedule allows, and other times not so much. But if you want to talk about sort of some of my favorite grant experiences, and Rebecca can relate to this, I think Bloomberg Philanthropies comes up time and time again in my work as being some of my favorite, because they really have their stuff together in terms of how you really think about a problem and a solution in a really meaningful way, rather than, what we try to avoid in a grant situation is, well, here's a grant, maybe we should apply for it. And it's like, well, wait a second, do we have a project that makes sense? Or are we trying to fit something in there that's not even really a priority? So then you're stuck with a project that you weren't really excited about and you weren't really going to do anyways, but now you have a funder who's holding your feet to the fire to do that. So what I appreciate about like a Bloomberg Philanthropies is taking that deeper dive. So I think it was 2017, we got to work on a Mayor's Challenge application, which I got to be on the project team for, which was really exciting, because usually I'm sort of that touch point who's like in and out throughout the grants process, and I'm not necessarily one of the boots on the ground actually doing the learning and working alongside my colleagues. So that was a cool experience in that we got to travel and we got to do human-centered design workshops. That's sort of where I learned about human-centered design and what that was and what that meant. And just being able to distill sort of these big ideas down into workable, actual, pliable projects. Because a lot of times people have these really big ideas, but it's a process to narrow that down into something that's meaningful.
Rebecca, you were a part of that project team too. I mean, can you share a little bit about that? I mean, Melanie, you just hit on this, the human-centered design. Like, what is that? Can you maybe describe that in a little bit greater detail, Rebecca?
Yeah, so there are a number of companies, I think, that specialize in this. So we actually got certified through a company based in Pittsburgh called Luma. So they have a training session, but basically it's there's a lot of focus on like prototyping. So you take an idea and then you workshop it really well with people. So basically the whole design, they use it for like product development too. But basically I think that's like one of the best examples, but basically you're developing that product or that grant application or the service. And so in our case, we were looking for a program for energy efficiency. But we were, always testing and reiterating and redoing things based on, feedback from people that you're testing.
And just to that point, I think the overarching theme for me is getting the voices in the room that aren't usually heard and allowing them to have a stage and have a presence and have meaningful dialogue with the folks in the room who are often the very loud voices. So in that process with Bloomberg, we got to talk to a multitude of people. So it was not just politicians and not just department heads and not just people working at the city. It was nonprofits, it was for-profits, it was, those other folks in the room who actually do a lot of the work that we as policymakers try to influence and sometimes think that we have the answer before we have those kinds of conversations. So it helps you sort of take a road like this that gets you to point B that I think is a smarter way of working. And it doesn't always work out that way because it is a long, rigorous process. So it's more of an ideal case of how we work. But I think we as city government have done a much better job of that since that project. I know I've definitely taken some of those tools and techniques along with me and used them elsewhere.
I was going to say, have you been able to kind of, I'm sorry, Rebecca, go ahead.
Well, I was just thinking of like some of the projects that we've done or applied for grants for since then. And it seems like we're a little bit more targeted on what are those projects that we're already doing or the ones that will make the most sense. It seems like, we've carried forward some of the learnings from how do you develop like a good project. From Bloomberg.
Which is even increasingly important as we're in a pandemic world with city budgets that are slowly dwindling, and how do we make sure that we're strategic in what we're applying for? That was a big part of what the mayor wanted to do, was to make our office integrated with the capital and operating teams, because it really wasn't before that. So it's being strategic and like, okay, well, here's what we have planned down the pike, and here's what we definitely have funding for, because oftentimes grants mean you get money, but they also often mean that you need more money and that you need more people to do the work. Right.
Can you talk about, a lot of folks come to you, hey, Melanie, we got this great idea. Can you walk through with us like what that navigation is in terms of taking an idea to meeting a deadline and getting, kind of the idea into something that's really focused and a winning grant?
Well, and I think that's the cool part of grant applications is they force you into that process, whether or not you want to. So, for instance, if we have somebody who says, there's this program that New York City does that we really want to do here. So we'll sit down and talk about sort of the ins and outs of what that project may look like in their ideal world. And then we actually use a software called eCivis. So we have a pretty regular schedule of grants that come up. When it comes to state and federal, they follow basically the same schedule. But when you're looking at sort of the local foundation and national foundations, those ones can be a bit of an oddball. And we'll use our software to look up keywords, and we have searches that we run every day. The first thing I do when I come and sit down on my computer is look through all of the grants that have come out that day. So I've got, pretty good eyeballs on what's out there. And if I always tell people, if you have an idea, like, let's talk about it, because if you don't tell me about it, I don't know what I'm looking for and what's going to be most helpful to you. So after we talk through sort of all the programmatic details of what they want, let's say I find an opportunity that I think may fit, it may not fit their entire program, but it may fit one aspect of that program. So then we talk about how we can shape that project. It might not be exactly what the original intent was, but this is what we have money for, and this is how we can do it.
Where do you see kind of, has the pandemic, like, we don't want to kind of ignore this, like it's right in front of us. Has the pandemic shifted both the grant making process and what's available? Like, have you seen kind of a different trend line starting to form?
Definitely. And I think, even presidential administration to presidential administration, you see pretty large shifts in the way that things are funded. Definitely during this pandemic, we've been learning a lot about FEMA and how to navigate FEMA and PEMA, which is Pennsylvania's arm of FEMA, and how all of that money sort of funnels through. So we've had a lot of grants related to that have all been.
For folks, that's the Federal Emergency Management Administration and the Pennsylvania Emergency Management.
Correct. So that's all of us recouping funds related to the pandemic, whether that's, personal protective equipment or other things that we've needed to spend salary money on because we needed overtime, things like that. So during the pandemic, that has definitely been the highlight of things that are happening. And I would say probably our asks now are much more focused on projects that exist rather than new ideas that are coming out just because we know the city's coffers are getting tighter and tighter and tighter as the months go on. Local foundations have shifted a lot of their funding to emergency relief. So I think we've tapped into them less than we normally would. But it's sort of like we're all in this together and we're all kind of trying to figure it out. So the shifts are still happening. They'll continue to happen. And depending on what happens in this next presidential election, I imagine would see more shifts happening at the federal level as well, which obviously trickles down to state and local funding as well. So we've seen some funding pooled for projects that we were already granted, but we didn't spend the money yet. So they're just like, we don't have money for this anymore, so we can't do this project. So reapply next year.
Because it got reallocated? Or?
And they've needed to use their emergency funds for other things.
Interesting. So, that's PEMA and FEMA. Have you seen national and local funders? Has there been shifts there, I guess?
Yeah, definitely. Some of the language that you're seeing, and I think we've even done a couple of grants with you guys looking over sort of a shift in focus towards pandemic related things. So we worked on an interesting one, and the funder is escaping me, but there was a program out there that is for transportation projects. And it usually doesn't come out when it came out, but they pushed it out, and it was about how we can use art and creative spaces to keep social distancing on sidewalks a thing, and how we can use that. So how can we use art in a really creative way during a pandemic, which is something we obviously wouldn't have seen before. So definitely seeing shifts in languages, shifts in the type of programming that people want to fund right now, and all the like. Interesting.
You guys are both graduates, just to go back at the I'm going to call it the Bloomberg School. In terms of working with Bloomberg Philanthropies, with which we've, like a lot of cities, have frankly been beneficiaries of some of the creative thinking that they have been able to do to help support local governments, and specifically cities. What are some of the big takeaways that both of you have, really, I think, from working with Bloomberg and Bloomberg Philanthropies and just kind of the disciplines, I will call them, that they kind of have yielded with us?
I think one of my biggest takeaways from Bloomberg over the years in my various capacities, and they get this because they have worked only with city governments for so many years, they constantly are pushing you to push the envelope within your organization. So it's really easy as a city government employee or a director or what have you to become complacent and just be like, well, this is how things are. This is how they've always been. And this is really challenging. And we can't do this and we can't do that. And I think Bloomberg is exceptional at helping you navigate those kinds of challenges and helping sort of reinvigorate you and getting you excited about how you might be able to do something, even though you thought you couldn't do it.
Yeah, that's interesting. Rebecca, do you have any reflections?
I mean, yeah, they have a lot of testing of ideas and prototyping that I think you don't ever really hear in government, just because, the risk is so high with taxpayer dollars, right? But they have, I think what's really good about Bloomberg is that they have processes that they use too to keep you organized. So there's like step-by-step, ways to go about testing your idea or bringing a group together, or they just seem to have it all together. Started to go through another one recently, and it's always like it's the same model almost, with like the same learnings. So obviously it's, a process that's like tried and true.
And they kind of force you, and I don't know if I'm allowed to swear, but they take like the out of what you're saying. So like you communicate an idea to them and they're like, well, no, what does that mean? And you can use 25 words to say it. And you're like, I can't, can I say that in 25 words? And if I can't, is this even a real idea? So it just like challenges your brain in new ways of thinking and like gets you around a lot of the political ways that we're used to speaking.
I just want to put you on the spot, Melanie. You're definitely the podcast rookie, and David just cringed. You're our first piece of editing that we're going to have for the cable channel. But you're right. I mean, it is a discipline that, we're all required, right? I think to help get that in tune to you, to really get to the nuance out.
Mm-hmm.
And to get you focused on what is it you're trying to accomplish here. Get rid of all the jargon. Let's really get down to brass tacks. One of the things that, and I've wondered this, and I'm interested to hear your guys' thoughts. Like, I was a part of the one Bloomberg team that worked on cross-sector collaboration, and I totally agree with you. Like, both the process and the work through that they have are good lessons that you can carry through. How do we extend that both throughout like other parts of city government, but also with a lot of the partners that we work with locally in terms of some of those lessons? Like, are there ways that we can, whether it's the human-centered design work or the communications process, are there ways that we can extend that to local partners and local philanthropy, et cetera?
I think now that I'm thinking about it, every time we've had a Bloomberg engagement, we've had a really like terrific coach. So they like hire people to be the coach for the cities. So I mean, if we were to, replicate their model, you need somebody who's like guiding the team towards doing that. So I would say the coaching, like you can use their blueprints, but you really just need that central person that's keeping everybody to task.
And I would like to give IMP, our Innovation and Performance Department, credit because I think they've done a really good job of looking at process management. So I don't know if you guys have tapped into them at all, but we use them as sort of like a third-party coach for looking at the grants process and what we currently do and what we could be doing better and like what's working and what's not working. And I do think oftentimes you need that other person, whether it's a coach or whether it's, an innovation team member, to sort of help be that facilitator, because it's hard to be the facilitator when you're in that process itself.
And when you have to ask the hard questions too, right? Like those coaches are always like, well, it sounds like what you're saying is BS.
We don't have to edit that one. I think that's good. No, that's a good point. I mean, like whether it's the business resource managers that IMP has, I think it's a good model that there are, effectively guides, facilitators, docents, whatever you want to call it, to help go through the process. To that same effect, Melanie, because you touch, and we're in a similar kind of role, you touch all the different departments. Are there things that we could share from grants that one department might be working on with another? Are there things that you see where you're like, hey, you guys really need to get together? Or
definitely, 100%, definitely, yes. We've done a really good job, I think, over the last however many years, actually breaking down silos between departments and sort of forging those relationships. And I think grants oftentimes, they force those relationships to happen because, for instance, if we're working on a building project, it probably includes DPW, it probably includes city planning, it probably includes a bunch of different people who have to work together. And then you find when you have those people in the room talking about this project, another project will come up and then it's like, well, wait a second, we haven't talked about this, or, oh, wait a second, we haven't talked about this. So it is a unique perspective to have sort of this bird's eye view and say, well, wait, maybe we should be thinking about this person and this person working on this project together.
Yeah.
Oftentimes people are already talking, but I think the grants process forces you to formalize that relationship a little bit more.
Yeah, I'd agree. I mean, it gets you to put, in fact, I was just talking with Rebecca, just a heads up with Pittsburgh about this yesterday, about the Allegheny River Greenway. Like, we had missed a we had missed a grant cycle with DCD for an opportunity that was available, and just didn't have kind of the idea together yet, from what they were explaining to me. And I said, it makes sense to go through the rigors of going through the application process anyways.
Yeah.
So that the next time it comes around, you have your team together, you have your idea, pretty in a pretty cogent space, and then it keeps you on task.
Yeah, I tell people all the time that it's, even when we don't win a grant, it was not for nothing. It was certainly a good exercise in figuring out how to solve a problem with the resources that you have.
Maybe take that from there then. I mean, what happens though? Like, how do we keep ideas alive? Because you lose more than you win in the grant space. I don't know what our hit rate is, but it always feels that way anyways.
Yeah.
no matter how brilliant the ideas are and how strong the team is, like you're not going to win all the time for a variety of reasons. It's kind of like baseball, like similar type of, probably 300 batting average is pretty amazing, get you in the Hall of Fame. Probably the same with grants. But how do we keep those ideas alive for like the next one, so that they just don't go on the shelf?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I don't know that I have the answer for you. I think largely those ideas live and die with the program managers who care most about them, right? It's those people who are at the table saying, no, this project, this is what we should use this grant funding for. So we oftentimes, and you've been in these conversations, when there's a grant opportunity that comes up, and it could be, a multitude of projects, it's not just one, definitely this is what we're applying for. You've got to have those different voices at the table sort of standing up for their idea and saying, no, this is what I want to fund, and this is the project. I mean, I think right now a lot of projects, again, are being driven by budget conversations that are happening, just because they have to be. But I think that's something that we probably could do a better job of, is how do we keep those conversations going with projects that just sort of die, and they do. And oftentimes I think that's the trouble with grant funding, right? It's like, you have this idea, you implement it for a year, and now what? You've always got to be thinking of the what's next. And that's why it's so important that you're applying for projects that are really meaningful for your department and for you as an individual, that you can keep going and that have a lot of value for you. Otherwise, I mean, I always tell people, grants equal work. They are not just free money by any means. Somebody's got to do the management, and somebody's got to do the hard work. And, what does that look like when the grant funding is gone? And we have those conversations all the time, because a program shouldn't, in theory, just go away because the grant funding's gone. So the city often absorbs a lot of those costs, whether that's for a program or for a position that we funded, which I don't know what that reality looks like now in a pandemic world and in an economic world that isn't super stable right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's, we've been beneficiaries for sure with, whether it's something about like the City Energy Project or Rockefeller Foundation or Bloomberg Philanthropies. Like, one of the things I've appreciated so much with those programs is the recognition that local government needs resources and capacity, and then, the ability then to blend that capacity into the operations of kind of city government. Recognizing the value creation that they have, I think has been so important for kind of our sustainability work. And I know it's been true for others as well. What do you guys see, I think, on the horizon? I mean, we're in this pandemic, we're creeping into Q4, budget challenges are a reality, political, social, economic challenges are abound. What are ways in which kind of grant making and kind of resource development, or the development cycle, how can that help us, going forward, I think?
Oh, I mean, I think it's going to be absolutely critical going forward. I think probably now more than ever, grants offices across the country are thinking, oh my goodness, what are we doing? And in fact, I've had 2 different grants offices reach out to me specifically just to talk about sort of how Pittsburgh has done it. Because we have a fancy schmancy grants manual on the internet, and people see that and think, wow, like they actually have processes, and they think about how all of this works. And I think there's a realization that that kind of money is going to be absolutely critical for cities if they don't get the sort of financial help they need from the federal government, because it's just not, it's not out there for us right now. And it's, what are we supposed to do? And I think, you know, the truth is, like, I don't know what the landscape looks like for national foundations. I don't know what their coffers look like. I don't know what local foundations look like. I think we're probably looking at much heavier federal and state applications coming up more than anything else.
Interesting. Rebecca, any thoughts on the horizon? Needs? Now's the time to ask Melanie. We got her cornered.
I guess I'm just curious. So, like, we had a conversation with a woman from Delaware around what our grants office looks like. Like, do you have a sense of what other cities do with their grants offices? Like, how do we compare to how they're typically structured?
I mean, I think we're pretty lean and mean. We actually had a conversation with Detroit, and their post-award team alone was like over 17 people. Wow. And we were like, what? They've got like these implementation coaches and all of this cool stuff. So I think we have a ways we could go, but I think we do really well for what we have. You know, I think our budget office has done a really good job of making sure that we have what we need and that we're working with the right people. You know, a lot of what I do is just breaking down barriers all day. It's making sure that DPW is talking to their budget analyst, who's talking to the grants office, who's talking to this city planner, who's talking to this person about these projects that are happening. So, yeah.
I'm just amazed. You mentioned that we were on a presentation the other day, Jen Olsinger from the Office of Management and Budget, and I think Rebecca, you were on that too, with the procurement discussion with
with Denmark,
with our Danish partners from Aarhus, and you know, they have, I think they said 60 people in like their, you know, on their procurement team, and Jen's like, we have 8. And we definitely, everyone in the city, I think, shares this in terms of how lean and we're not mean, we're nice, but how effective we are with the capacity that we do have. But that definitely has its constraints, right?
Definitely.
You know, so the ability to kind of add capacity is one of those places and spaces that can have big leverage, frankly.
Definitely. So I think like you're saying, given the resources that we have, I think we're doing a pretty great job. Certainly there's always room for reiteration and improvement on what we're doing. And I think we try our best to make sure that we stay engaged in that and make sure that we're looking at how we do things and how we can do things better on a yearly basis. So
that's terrific.
Percentage, I don't know if you know this offhand, but like what kind of percentages do we get in grants versus like the budget?
How do you mean?
But like what amount of like our spending is supplemented by grants?
Ooh, I don't know the answer to that. I can tell you that as of January, from January until about mid-August, we had secured like 4.6 million in grants.
Wow.
Which, you know, it varies wildly. You know, people ask, well, what's your win rate? And it's like, well, that's not, it depends on the year. It depends on what we applied for. It's not really a fair statistic to give you, because sometimes we might win a $25 million Tiger grant, or sometimes we might not. So that totally skews your numbers in one way or another. I bet you
and
something.
Tiger for folks is the Federal Transportation Award, right?
Sorry,
so,
we speak in all these all these letters all the time.
Anybody, so yeah. I don't want listeners thinking we're getting like 25 million tigers coming to the city.
Well, tiger's not even a thing anymore. It's since changed names.
Right. Probably for that reason, right?
But yeah, I don't know what that percentage is, but I would hope that it's increasing steadily throughout the years as we get a better handle on things. You know, when I first started, we really weren't applying for very many state grants. We were leaving a lot of money on the table. So this administration has done a really good job in lobbying for those kinds of projects that are definitely at that state and national level that we hadn't been doing nearly as much previously.
Yeah, it's important to do that prospecting, right? I mean, to understand kind of what's out, you know, understand what your needs are, but then also what's out there, see how you match up. one final question for me, and just to kind of pivot a little bit, but in that sense, you almost have, no matter what the award size is, you still have to put in somewhat the same amount of work, don't you? Like a $10,000 grant and a $1 million grant, they might not be wildly different in the amount of work that you have to put in to get it, right?
That is very true.
So how do you juggle that, I guess?
I think it's sort of one of those questions that we pose to the potential grant manager. The way that our office works is, because there are only 3 of us, we obviously can't oversee each and every single grant that's out there. So we rely on city departments to really oversee that project and process. And we're here as like a guiding hand when you need us. But I think that's a conversation that we have with folks. It's like, do you have the capacity to spend this money and spend it effectively? And if the answer is no, it is totally 110% okay to not pursue something because you don't think you have the capacity to do it. And there are instances in which that happens.
Interesting. Just to kind of, we're coming up on time here. I just want to thank you, Melanie. But we have this is the end of podcast question that we throw out to all of our listeners, or all our guests. Excuse me. We just like to see what you're reading, what you're listening to, and what you're watching. And just as a way to both build our own entertainment libraries, but we're particularly in this time of the pandemic, we've been interested to just learn what our colleagues are consuming, whether it's heavy, whether it's light. So we just wanted to put that in front of you and see what Melanie Ondek is reading, watching, or listening to.
My inner nerd is going to show so hard right now.
Show it.
I've been watching on television. I've been rewatching Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I've rewatched the entire series. I don't know what that says about me, but that's what I've been doing.
Okay.
I've also started Little Fires Everywhere on Hulu, which is fantastic if you haven't had a chance to watch that yet, with Kerry Washington and Reese Witherspoon.
Okay.
It's great. What I'm reading, I can't say the title because there's a swear word in it, but it's called the F It Diet. And it's all about anti-diet culture stuff, which is really fascinating. So anybody who's been on a million diets here and there, you read this book and it's like, oh, well, here's another alternative for you.
Oh, it's terrific. So back to Buffy the Vampire Slayer. So you're rewatching it. What is it different since you've kind of gone through it? Like, how is it?
It's incredibly nostalgic for me because my mom and I used to watch it on Friday nights when it premiered on the WB, when that was a thing.
Right.
So it's been interesting to see I think for me in particular, the fashion trends that were really popular that I used to, you used to wear like the cornrows in your hair with the little butterfly clips that held it back and then you curled it. And I was like, oh man, I used to love that hair. And I wonder when it's coming back. I was watching a bunch of high school kids and it's been incredibly enjoyable. I've loved every minute of it.
Movie? Wasn't there a movie?
Yeah, but it doesn't have Sarah Michelle Gellar in it, so you can't. It's trash.
Oh, that's interesting. That's it. Why was she? Did the movie come before the show?
No, I don't know why they didn't make. I don't know why they didn't make it with her. It was one of those weird. I remember picking it up actually at like a Blockbuster and looking at the cover of it and being like, "This isn't Buffy. Who's this?"
For our younger listeners, Blockbuster is where you went to go rent your movies, right? I still might have a Blockbuster card in my wallet. And then the F It Diet. What is that again?
Yeah, it's an anti-diet culture book. So it's primarily for women, I would say, and all of the pressures that we have around being a very particular way all the time, and how being so obsessed with diet culture and food culture and what that does to your psyche, and how you can learn how to let that go a little bit and be a person who enjoys having a social life and isn't, sitting there counting calories on their phone while they're out to dinner and all of those things. So it's a deep dive for me. I'm a fitness instructor on the side, so that's a part of my world that is fascinating. So I like learning about that kind of stuff too.
Oh, that's terrific. And is it a deep read, or is it, something it's easier to consume?
I mean, I listen to all of my books, so I'm an audiobook junkie. I listen to a lot of books every year just going for walks. I wouldn't say it's very scientific. She does quote a lot of scientific things in it, but it's definitely a lighter read. So if anybody out there is looking for something sort of a little bit lighter hearted, but also very heavy in other ways too, that's great. And I've also been on the trend of Glennon Doyle's new book, and I don't know why the name is escaping me. Darn it. Hang on, let me look it up.
While you're looking it up, Rebecca, how about you? What are some things that you're consuming this week?
I am at a loss. I can't think of anything.
Untamed is the book I'm thinking of. I'm a self-help junkie, so I will take all the self-help I can get.
Hey, in this time, folks have kind of heard me on this. You might enjoy this. I'll give my plug. Is the Trained podcast by Nike has been really good. It's Ryan Flaherty is the host that basically goes through it, and prior to the pandemic, it was a lot focused on kind of technique, but he's really kind of got into a lot of the aspects of like mental training, and it's just some really good ones, like Kevin Elko, who's a motivational speaker, is the guy that was on just this past week, that you would dig it. He has, was it 26 or 27 championship rings, and so he works with pro and college sports, and just a super kind of introspective kind of person. And then he also has, this week I'm listening to, he has Georgie Brunvales, who is she's a trainer and specializes in kind of women's training matters. So she's a marathon runner and just goes into some really great stuff that it's pretty
I'm going to
good.
have to check that out. Definitely.
Yeah, so I highly recommend that. That's some good stuff. And Rebecca, you've been out in the woods, right? So
I've been out in the woods. And trying to decouple myself from technology, I guess. Doing some plant identification.
We all need more of that.
Yeah, totally. We all need to decouple. That is for certain. So.
I was outside this morning. I was getting a cup of coffee and I saw something fly past my window. So I have chickens too, and in my backyard, and obviously they were away. I don't keep them out all day, but there was a giant hawk who landed on my chicken coop and was just hanging out there. So I get to enjoy a little bit of nature and unplug it at my house too.
I think we hear the Hayes Woods Eagles down here in the run.
What?
I haven't been able to see them, but I can hear that like eagle scream, like right before the Colbert Report. That's how I know it's the eagle scream.
We're going to have a show dedicated solely to chickens.
I would love to do a chicken keeping podcast. So anytime you want to invite me back to do that, I am game.
All right.
That's a bad pun. I think we should definitely do maybe like an on-site chicken,
yes.
Chicken kind of
plating.
I would love that.
So we are on it. Well, hey, we really appreciate it, Mel. It is great to talk with you and share your insights on the grant process and so much else. We appreciate the partnership with you and the work that we all do together. It's really great stuff as always.
Thank you. I agree. It's always a pleasure chatting with both of you.
Excellent. Thank you, Rebecca, and thank you all for listening to the Grant Street Experience. We appreciate you guys tuning in to us. Thanks to Bill, David, and Alex on our cable team and producing another quality episode of the Grant Street Experience. Thanks all, and we'll talk to you soon. Take care.